Welcome to the Drum Shuffle, a podcast offering insights, perspectives, and conversations for drummers. I'm your host, Jamie Eads.
Hey, how's it going out there, everybody? Welcome to the Drum Shuffle. Jamie Eads joining you as I do each and every week. This is episode 97. I hope each and every one of you are having a fantastic week out there. Life is still a bit shuttered. I hope everybody's getting a lot of practice time in. I was joking around with a friend the other day, and I said everybody is going to be a monster drummer after this thing is over, because all we can do is sit around in woodshed right now, which is a good thing. So I hope everybody's staying safe and staying healthy. We have a fantastic interview for you today. I have been looking forward to this one for quite some time. I'm going to be joined today by the great David Northrup of Boz Scaggs, Travis Tritt, the Oak Ridge Boys, Tanya Tucker. He's just played with everybody. I can't wait for you to hear this conversation that we had right after this message from our sponsor, Los Cabos Drumsticks.
The best kept secret for drummers is finally out. Los Cabos Drumsticks may look like the sticks you grew up with, but these are not your father's drumsticks. Los Cabos Drumsticks is Canada's #1 drumstick brand, and they are coming to a retailer near you. With operations in over 28 countries worldwide, thousands of drummers have already discovered the Los Cabos difference. Using FSC certified wood from Canada and the US, Los Cabos make the finest quality drumsticks, percussion tools, and accessories on the market. The best news, Los Cabos Drumsticks offers you a ton of choice. They have 22 individual drumstick models and 14 percussion tools, many of which are available in 3 different wood types: maple, white hickory, and red hickory. Red hickory comes from the center or heart of the hickory tree and has been independently proven to be both stronger and more elastic than white hickory without adding a lot of weight. While most drumstick manufacturers have shunned red hickory, Los Cabos Drumsticks has embraced it, becoming the only established stick brand in the world to offer a full line of red hickory drumsticks. To learn more about Los Cabos Drumsticks, visit them online at loscabosdrumsticks.com, follow them on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and don't forget to ask for Los Cabos Drumsticks at your favorite retailer. Dare to be different. Join the Red Hickory Revolution with Los Cabos Drumsticks.
All right, guys and girls, as I mentioned, we're about to be joined by the great David Northrup in just a moment. David has just had a legendary career in Nashville. He has played with just scores and scores of fantastic artists. Most notably, he spent 10 years in Travis Tritt's touring band, which was just at the height of Travis's career. So David has lots of great experience. Most recently, he was touring with Boz Scaggs, and he has a fantastic new solo record out called Shapes, and it is released under his name of David Northrup, and we talked to him all about that. And David is just such a nice guy and just always goes out of his way to help other drummers. Just a fantastic human being. I know you're going to get a lot out of this interview, so please help me welcome to the Drum Shuffle, David Northrup. Hey, good afternoon, David. How's it going today?
Good, Jamie. How are you?
I can't complain too much, adjusting to the new normal as everyone is. Thanks so much for taking some time to come on the Drum Shuffle. We really do appreciate that.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah.
My pleasure.
For sure, man, for sure. So, as is the tradition here on our show, we try to start at the beginning and kind of understand what your roots are. It's my understanding that you grew up in upstate New York, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So Buffalo or which area of upstate New York are you from?
Actually, central New York.
Okay.
a small town just outside of Syracuse.
Okay.
The town was called Chittenango.
Okay. Now, so being from New York, obviously you're a Nashville guy and you've been in Nashville for a lot of years. I think you did a stint in Florida as well.
Correct.
And we'll kind of scratch on that here in just a second. But growing up in New York, were you always drawn to the drums? Is there a kind of a seminal moment that you can point to that said, yeah, I knew I was going to be a drummer at this point?
Yes, kind of. Interestingly enough, I was fortunate to be brought up in a time where, in the 70s where there was a lot of great music, 70s through the 80s, and I had an uncle about 7 years older than I am, my mother's brother, and he was into really great music and turned me on to a lot of exceptional music when I was very young, from Rush to the Beatles to Jethro Tull, Steely Dan, Queen. And he had just a wonderful taste and very diverse taste in music. And from an early age, I remember hanging out with him and listening to his albums. And when I was probably 16 years old, he took me to my first concert, which was David Gilmour.
Oh, wow.
Guitar player from Pink Floyd. He was promoting a new album called About Face, and he took me to that concert in Syracuse at a place called the Landmark Theater, which was a big theater there in Syracuse. And I remember watching the show, incredibly just enthralled by the show and the music, of course, because I was a fan. But I focused in on the drummer, who was Chris Slade.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Chris Slade, played with Manfred Mann and Asia and did a stint with AC/DC. And I just remember looking and watching and listening and thinking that is the most incredible thing in the world.
Yeah.
To be able to be up on stage playing this great music. And, I don't know how much I was thinking about the possibility of getting paid to do it, but I was just thinking, that's amazing. So that was a very big turning point. I recognized that as officially being bit by the music bug. That's when everything had changed for me. And I had been playing several years. That was 1984. I started playing in 1980.
Okay.
So that was the turning point right there. That's when things went off in my brain.
Yeah. So now, having been playing for a few years before, the bug bit you, as you put it, were you taking lessons? Were you doing, kind of school, jazz band, things like that?
Yes, I was involved with all the school music activities, concert band, stage band, which was, considered jazz band. We had a Dixieland band. Anything that had drum set, I was involved in. And of course, as I said, the concert band. And about that time in 1984, probably shortly after that concert, I started taking private lessons, drum set lessons, reading lessons from some teachers in the area.
I gotcha. Now, so during this time, as a young teen and you're taking lessons, all that good stuff, were you forming garage bands with your buddies and things like that?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. I think starting my sophomore year, probably right around that time, I was involved with some musicians, older musicians that were in my high school when we would practice and play. We played a few dances at our high school. And I played with different bands like that, starting my sophomore year throughout the rest of high school. I actually ended up playing with a college band my senior year. All the other musicians in the band were from Syracuse University, and I was still in high school.
So, I mean, that was where you were kind of cutting your teeth, learning how to do live shows, things like that.
Yes.
I gotcha. Now, how soon after, your school career did you decide to like move away from New York? Did you stay in New York for a while, kind of, chasing the circuit, the scene and bands like that? Or did you decide to leave town pretty much, right after school?
What actually took place is it took me about a year and a half, 2 years after high school to really decide that music was going to be my path. After I graduated, I went to college for a year for something totally contrary to music. I was studying health education, and I thought I was going to get into, physical fitness training, possibly sports medicine, something like that. I was, an athlete in high school, and I was really into that sort of thing.
Sure.
So I attended Cortland State University in New York for a year, and after a year, I realized that that's not the path I was going to take. And during that time, I was still playing with that band from Syracuse University. So after leaving college, I spent about a year and a half around Syracuse. I started studying again with some premier local players, player teachers. One of the guys' name was Frank Briggs, who has a huge teaching school online called the Drum School.
Okay.
He's based in L.A., fantastic player. And then I studied with Wilby Fletcher, who was a Baltimore guy that spent a lot of time in New York City and ended up in Central New York. So I studied with those two guys for a bit, about a year and a half, and then relocated to Central Florida.
Okay. I gotcha. And now you're going to have to correct me if I'm wrong. I know a little bit about your background, but going to Central Florida, I mean, obviously the work is probably going to be a little bit more steady than what it would be in Syracuse, I'm assuming, because you've got two of the biggest tourist attractions on earth in Central Florida, and lots of tourism, lots of gigs to be had, down in the Orlando area. But while you were down there, is that when and where you met Les? Because suffice it to say, I think that was the connection you made that kind of really opened doors for you. Is that right?
Yes, that is right. Les Dudek. I met Les at a small club in Lakeland, Florida on a Thursday night. I was sitting in with a blues artist named James Peterson, Lucky Peterson's father.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And Les happened to be sitting in as well. We were both sitting and jamming with James, and I had known of Les. I was familiar with his background, playing with Boz Scaggs and Steve Miller and Cher and Stevie Nicks, but I wasn't as familiar with his solo work, which is actually absolutely astounding. He put out some amazing records, and obviously I didn't become aware of those until my association with him took place. But we jammed together, and he liked the way I played, and afterwards we hung out at the bar and had a few drinks and closed the place down. And he had discussed with me an album project that he had started about 2 years prior to our meeting, and that he got sidetracked and hadn't finished the project yet and had one track that he needed to record, the title track for the recording, for the record. And he asked me if I was interested in doing it, and I was, of course, interested. And he said the original drummer that had played on all the other tracks, which was his good friend, had passed away.
Oh, man.
And, that kind of stuck with me. And, we sat there and we continued to talk, and I thought to myself, that's real tragic. And so, I asked him, I was like, that's really sad about your friend. Who was the drummer that played on all the other tracks and passed away? He goes, Jeff Porcaro.
I mean,
and oh my God, I'm 24 years old. I almost fell off the bar stool.
Of course.
I'm this young kid and I'm trying to keep it cool. And I thought, holy crap, he wants me to finish a record that Jeff Porcaro had started. So that was pretty amazing.
Yeah.
That was a total God thing.
Yeah, well, sure. I mean, I'm laughing all through that story because I knew who the other drummer was on the record. And I think it's funny that you didn't realize, he hadn't disclosed who it was. Of course, I'm not laughing at the tragic passing of one of our masters, but, I think it's funny that, you're, this first recording that's going to make a difference for you, you're stepping into some pretty darn big shoes. Yeah,
for sure. And, it's still to this day, 20 something years later, I just, it was a huge turning point and just a real special honor, to be featured on a record with my hero that had passed away. And, like I said, I really feel like it was a God thing. I mean, as most drummers that was familiar with Jeff's work, we were all heartbroken when he passed away, especially so young and having a family and all that. But he was such a special player, and he moved and influenced so many people. And I remember when he passed, I was affected as if I knew him, which unfortunately I never met him, but I felt like I had lost someone that I had known for years. So it was, a real special God moment, if you will, for me in my career.
Well, and I mean, obviously I don't want to put too, to say, and the rest is history, but, you did that gig, you finished that record. And I know that, here recently you've been touring with Boz Scaggs. So that is certainly a connection, from the past to the current that makes a lot of sense,
That was another just crazy incident. And I became, of course, I was always familiar with Boz Scaggs growing up, and I listened to, I had his records, with, obviously because of Jeff, but just because of the great pop music of the day, in the 80s. That was stuff that I listened to, and I was familiar with his pop hits from the 70s, but I became really more informed and learned the history of Boz because of Dudek's association with him. Les played with Boz during the heyday. He recorded with Jeff. He was in Boz's band when Porcaro was in it. So it was like, the stories were amazing, and I was just completely enamored about learning about all that. And then Jeff played on 4 or 5 of Dudek's solo records.
Yeah.
And that was, after the recording, I had a chance to play live with him. We did some touring and some club dates and stuff. And I was young, I learned a lot working with Les.
Yeah.
So that was good. That was like going to school, having the opportunity to play with a guy that had played with my hero you know, and that was, you know, one of those situations that you couldn't learn like that by going to music school. It was just one of those things you're just thrown in to the fire and, you know, sink or swim.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think that's amazing. And for our listeners that don't know, you know, I mean, I grew up on a steady dose of, you know, Southern rock and hard rock and all that stuff. You know, I'm a couple of years your junior, I think, but, you know, I grew up on kind of the 80s stuff, you know, but always looking backwards. So I was a huge Allman Brothers fan growing up, you know, and for those that don't know, Les started playing with the Allman Brothers when he was, you know, 20, 21 years old. I mean, he was just a baby. And, you know, I think one of his claims to fame is he actually maybe did the solo on Ramblin' Man. I'm not sure.
He did.
So that is a true story?
That is a true story.
Wow.
Yep. He is the first part of that guitar solo. There's two. There's the first one is his, you know, the famous one that everybody emulates. Yeah. He was just a kid, and the stories of that recording session and his association with the Allman Brothers was also just, you know, incredible.
Yeah, for sure. Well, so, you know, after you met Les and you know, kind of got to do all these things, you know, was the next big break, and this is where I kind of lose your chronology, but, you know, certainly the gig that you held for, I guess, the longest period of time was the gig with Travis Tritt and his band. Was that kind of the how do I want to say this? Was that why you moved to Nashville? Is that what got you to Central Tennessee? Was the Travis Tritt gig?
Actually, I moved to Nashville in 1995 from Central Florida just to, I guess, further my career. After working with Dudak and having that recording credit with Jeff, I thought, well, you know, there's not as many opportunities in Central Florida for me as a young, aspiring musician as there would be in Tennessee, in Nashville.
Right.
You know, so I made the move. I made the move in '95, and, you know, basically had to start all over again. I had very few connections up here, but I knew that was, you know, it was the sensible decision as far as location was concerned. Being in a music mecca, you know, my other alternative was New York City or Los Angeles, and I didn't feel drawn to those two places.
I got you.
You know?
Yeah.
And I had visited Nashville, and I just thought that this, you know, like I was called here. So I made the move and had some very lean times. Had played with some people. I got a break and started working with a Cajun country artist named Joel Saunier, and did some touring with him, did some recording with him, played on a few of his records and met some really fantastic musicians during that association. And I was also working with a new country artist named Rebecca Lynn Howard, and her bass player was a guy named Brian Henchcliffe. Sadly, Brian passed away about a month ago.
Yeah, So I actually knew Brian. So that's
Brian was a great guy.
Yeah,
and so Brian and I hit it off. We were the rhythm section, and as you know, Brian was a great guy. Everybody loved Brian. If you couldn't get along with Brian, then
not a lot of hope for you. Yeah,
no, he was just such a good dude. So he knew Travis Tritt's management, Falcom Goodman, and he liked my playing, and he said, "Hey, you know, dude, I have this in that from my understanding, Travis is going to be putting together a new band, and I could put your name in the hat if you're interested. And at that point, I had auditioned for a bunch of people that year. I auditioned for Clay Davidson. I didn't get the gig. I auditioned for Pam Tillis. I lost that gig to Rich Redmond. And then I know.
Well,
great.
I laugh because everybody in Nashville has lost one or two gigs to Rich Redmond. So.
Yeah. Well, even if it's not a playing situation, his personality is so huge that, and plus, Rich is just a great player. So,
yeah.
So, and then I auditioned for that same year. This is 2000. I auditioned for Trisha Yearwood, and I was sort of the runner-up, and I lost that to Charlie Morgan, Elton John's drummer.
Yeah.
So when Brian had mentioned, hey, I could get you an audition with Travis, I was like, yeah, whatever. Sure, I'm in. But, I had done so many auditions that year, it just really didn't excite me. But sure enough, it eventually materialized. And the very interesting thing about that whole situation was one of Travis's managers, Gary Falcom, was I think San Francisco guy. So he was very familiar with who Les Dudek was.
Okay.
So when he got my press kit, he was very familiar with that, and he was impressed by that. So when Brian recommended me, they said, yes, we'd love to have this guy audition. And then once I had a slot to audition, I got a phone call from Gary and said, hey, look, we have you auditioning this time on the first day, but we wanted to know if you would be interested in playing drums for all the other auditions, and we'll pay you for it. And I'm like,
oh man,
yeah.
that's super.
Well, yeah, it was a huge in, because I had a chance to play with Travis more than anybody.
Right.
And I had a chance to really learn, after my audition, I continued to play with him with other bass players and keyboard players and whatnot. So I had a chance to really kind of key in on his body language and his playing and so that was a huge advantage for me. But there was a lot of great players auditioned. Mike Kennedy auditioned, who was had some downtime from George Strait. One of my favorite drummers in the 80s, Ian Wallace, who played with Don Henley, he auditioned.
Really? Wow. Okay.
Yep. Another great drummer who plays with Hank Williams Jr. now, Lee Kelly, he auditioned. So, I mean, there was some, and there was other guys too. I can't remember all of them, but those guys were all really great players. So it wasn't, there was some competition there. I think having had the opportunity to play with Travis more than anybody was definitely an advantage.
Yeah. Well, and we say on this show all the time too, that you have to know your instrument and you have to be a good player, but it's the other 22 hours a day that you travel with all those people. So it could come down to just the fact that Travis was like, well, David's not a pain in the neck.
That's huge. Yeah. You have to be able to live with people on the road. And
yeah. So, I mean, it helps that, you can play your instrument, but the fact that you didn't aggravate him at all during that whole process probably paid.
I'm sure I did. He would probably have, I know he does. I know he has some stories, but it's really interesting to think about too. I was 32 years old and I had the gig almost 10 years. So I grew up, that's to me being 20 years older now. Or actually 30 years. I'm going to be 52 this week, so I'm an old guy. Not really, but in considering the perspective of a 32-year-old guy 20 years ago, I was very young. I was very, I want to say green compared to how I play now, and I also have to consider that Travis was 20 years younger.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he's 5 years older than me. So we were young. We were very young. It was a young band, but it was really exceptional band. And, you know, when you have musicians that work together on that level for that many years, there's a significant chemistry that takes place, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I was very, very, very fortunate to have that opportunity. And gosh, he's just a great artist, man. Just a fantastic singer, you know, one of the best that I've ever worked for. And just great music, so many hits, and a wonderful entertainer. I was reminded every night when I stood on the side of the stage and I watched him do his acoustic set that he did not need any of us. He could do it all by himself.
Yeah. And I mean, I think a lot of people, it's lost on them at just what a great guitar player Travis Tritt is. And
he's the real deal.
Yeah. I mean, didn't he, in his early years, didn't he tour with maybe Tanya Tucker as her guitar player?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
No, he was always
his own.
He was always an artist, to himself, you know.
I think maybe I'm getting him mixed up with somebody else, but he's a real good guitar player, no doubt about it.
Very, very good.
Yeah. So, well, and I know you did that gig. You said 10 years, but you know, after playing with an artist like Travis Tritt, and you joined the band, you know, he was, I mean, you know, CMA Entertainer of the Year, you know, during that time. I mean, he was at the height of his career. I mean, he could do no wrong at that time. And, you know, I mean, it was him and Garth Brooks, you know, I mean, those were the two guys at the top of country music. After playing with an artist like that, did you find that it was really easy to get gigs, you know, after playing with somebody like Travis Tritt? Having that on your resume, does that make that huge a difference?
Yeah, that's interesting that you should say that. During the time I was with Travis, I had an opportunity to sub for some artists as well during downtime with Travis. You know, there were gaps in our schedule. We did about 70 dates a year. So there were opportunities to work with some other people, and having the association with Travis, having the experience, you know, working at that level, and, you know, it opened doors for other opportunities. I got called to sub. Well, actually, I got called to go out and play with Joe Diffe for about 6 months when he was in between drummers. And we had some time off. Travis took a sabbatical. This was probably in 2004. Travis was having his second child, he and his wife. So he decided to, you know, shut down for a few months and do the family thing. So it just happened to be a time where Joe Diffe didn't have a drummer, and I knew some people in his band. So I went out and did that, which was a you know, a great honor because he was such a another great singer.
Yeah.
Tragic that we just lost Joe. I had a chance to do that, and then I had a chance to work with Tanya Tucker some, sub for her drummer. At the time, her drummer was Jack Gavin, another fantastic drummer. So I went out and I subbed for Jack on the Tanya Tucker gig, and I worked with Doug Stone. And, you know, I think the credential working with Travis Tritt was very appealing to these artists. If they knew that, oh, well, this guy works for Travis Tritt, well, he must not be a slouch. So I just got, you know, and interestingly enough, the same thing took place with Pam Tillis. I subbed for Pam Tillis, who I had auditioned for. I didn't get the gig.
Right.
But once I had the gig with Travis, it was like, oh, okay, well, he's playing with Travis Tritt. Well, we could use him as a sub.
Yeah.
And Tanya Tucker was the same way. I auditioned for Tanya Tucker and didn't get the gig. And it's just, it's kind of funny that you're, you know, I guess once you have a credential like Travis Tritt and you're established, it's helpful. People look at you different.
Yeah, there's a certain level of name recognition, and I don't want to gloss over anything that's on your resume, but just for our listeners, some of the artists that you've played with over the years: Rick Derringer, John Waite, John Mellencamp, Winona, the Oak Ridge Boys, T. Graham Brown. It goes on and on and on. And look, I'm not trying to put you on the spot or anything, but, when you were 16, at the David Gilmour show in Syracuse, could you have ever imagined that you would be sitting here having this conversation all those years later with those names on your resume?
No, not at all. I've been very, very blessed, very, 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 very fortunate. I've had a really good career. I have to remind myself of that, especially with the state of the affairs that's taking place now in the world. But, I've been really lucky, man. I've been blessed. God has definitely shown favor to me in my career, and I've had some wonderful opportunities, and it's been a privilege. And I say that as humbly and genuinely as possible, because there are so many great musicians in this town and fantastic drummers. And, I've just been very fortunate to have had some great opportunities and work with not only the names that you just mentioned, but fantastic musicians that have been associated with those people.
Yeah,
I've been very fortunate, very blessed.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I say all that, you're being far too humble, because your playing is ridiculously good. So, I think that has propelled some of that. There is some luck in it, no doubt about it. But, if you only know how to play, straight ahead 4/4 at 120 BPM, if that's all you can do, all the luck in the world isn't going to keep you working. If you know what I mean, you're
sure,
a very versatile player. And, I think this is a good chance to kind of transition a little bit. I want to thank you very much for sending me a copy of your new solo record that just came out a couple of months back. It is called David Northrup Shapes, and you were kind enough to send me a copy of it so that I could give it a whirl. And I got to tell you, David, when I see solo records from drummers, I expect one of two things, right? Either to be completely underwhelmed, if I'm being honest, like, oh, okay, well, it's good, but it typically doesn't blow me away. And then the flip side of that is it's going to be 65 minutes of drum soloing over other dudes noodling around, right? So that's just been my experience. So I pulled the CD out of the sleeve and put it in the player. And, the first song that came on is called Snakes and Spiders. And it was one of the nastiest halftime, nasty in a good way, halftime shuffle grooves. You were definitely paying tribute to Picaro, I think, because it is just fantastic. And I was like, oh, this dude, David, came to play. He brought his A game. I listened to the whole record, which I typically don't do, but I sat and listened to the whole record in one, sitting, and man, it's really fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. So where did this come from? I guess, I know that you wrapped up with Boz, a little while back, but how long has this been percolating in your life? I mean, is this something that's been a work in project for a long time, or was this hey, I'm going to get a bunch of my really good player friends together and we're going to do an album?
That was That was definitely a project that was inspired by a very close friend of mine, Shane Theriault. Shane is a fantastic guitar player. He and I met doing session work together here in Nashville. We first met working with Joel Saunier. Shane at the time was working with the Neville Brothers, and I was still doing some dates with Les Dudek. This is probably about 95, 96. And we just hit it off. We had a lot of common musical interests, and so Shane recruited me to play on his first solo record that came out in 2000. And it had some really, fantastic players on it. Mean Willie Green from the Neville Brothers, and J.D. Blair, and myself, and a lot of just heavy musicians. And while we were doing that record, he said, this is something that you might want to consider down the road. And, I didn't put a lot of thought into it. And then a few years later, I played on one of his second recording. And, again, the topic came up. So I really started thinking about it and considering it. It was probably, 2004. Okay. And so I went into the studio with some guys that I was in a kind of a band project with, and we cut some instrumental songs, and nothing ever came of that. Then a few years later, I went to New Orleans with Shane. He produced 4 tracks and got some great players to record with me. George Porter Jr. from the Meters, David Torkanowski, who's just a fantastic jazz pianist. And we recorded 4 of Shane's songs. And we recorded actually at a studio that he was part owner in at the time, called Fudge Studios. So that took place. And it got set on the back burner just because life and touring and all that took place. And then after wrapping up with Boz Scaggs in 2000, at the end of 2017, I thought, this is the time. I've got to finish that. I got to, finish this record. And in 2018, when Boz came back into town, I was able to utilize some of the players that I had toured with gotcha. Boz.
Yeah.
Mike Miller, fantastic guitar player. Mike's background is, he played with Gino Vanelli for years. He played with Chick Corea's Electric Band too. Eric Crystal, saxophone player, I met playing with Boz, and he's on it. And Shane also played with Boz Scaggs about 10 years prior to me being involved.
Oh, okay. All right.
And he was the one that actually recommended me for the Boz gig to Richard Patterson.
Okay.
Who was Boz's bass player and band leader. And that's how that actually happened. That door opened for me because of Shane. But Shane produced the record for me and just really helped. He got me some great players and some good songs, and helped with the mix. I was really fortunate to have Richard Corsello, who's a very acclaimed engineer. He worked in the last tracking session that I did here in Nashville. We tracked the last 4 songs with him, and then Richard mixed the record. And Richard has worked with guys like, he's worked with Bad English. He's worked with the guys from Tesla. I actually met Richard through Troy Luccketta.
Okay.
And Richard also worked with Sonny Rollins. He was Sonny Rollins' engineer for many, many years. So I can't say enough of how significant Richard's work in recording and mixing on the record, how important that was for the end result. I mean, he really did an outstanding job for me. Great guy too.
I will agree with that wholeheartedly because, a lot of times, I mean, I don't want to get too far inside baseball here, right? And certainly don't break any confidences, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say you probably didn't have a $300,000 or $400,000 budget to get this done.
No.
No. Those don't exist for major label artists these days,
No.
So, obviously this was, a passion project, but it sounds as good as anything else with unlimited budgets. It's just a really good record.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Well, you've definitely got something to be proud of here. And, the mix quality is just phenomenal. It just sounds good from start to finish. And if I'm being honest with you, I wasn't expecting, kind of this really cool jazzy record, coming from the guy that played drums in Travis Tritt's band and Oak Ridge Boys. So,
yeah.
I mean, you've got some legit jazz chops as well, man.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks. Yeah, it was definitely a passion project. It was, a project that I wanted to showcase a different side of my playing that I don't have an opportunity to do as much as I would like, and, initially it was just going to be a project to be able to, have my own tracks to play along to when I did drum clinics. And then it just, I guess, snowballed into something a little bit more special, I guess, just because of the opportunities of the good songs that I had to work with and the personnel,
Yeah.
So I thank you for the kind words. I am very proud of it. It definitely took a long time to finish. But I'm pleased with the end result.
Well, yeah, as you should be. You're welcome. So for folks listening, this hit the streets right before the global pandemic broke loose.
Yeah, perfect timing.
Perfect time to release a record, David. Way to go, man.
Yeah.
But all joking aside, I'm assuming this can be picked up pretty much anywhere fine music can be found. But, tell folks where it's going to help you the most. If they want to check it out, I'm assuming going to your website is the best way.
Going to my website, you can buy physical copies there. Yep, without a doubt. It's only $10, and then there's a small fee for shipping, which is I think maybe $3. You can also order it direct from me if you're on Facebook. If you reach out to me at David Northrup Drums. I'm also on Instagram, David Northrup Drums. I've sold a bunch of them that way. People just reach out to me and, pay by Venmo or PayPal. It is also available at CD Baby for download. It's also available. Physical copies can be purchased at cdbaby.com. And then it's also available for download on iTunes.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's not streaming just yet. It eventually will be. But, for those that understand streaming, you don't make very much money at all. And it's definitely, it's not a project about making money. That's not it. But, I hope to cater towards musicians that are like me. I'm very much interested in album credits and recording and understanding the process. And, I'm hoping that, there are still people like me that like physical copies that can have that, So I was going to give it a few more months before I make it available for streaming.
Yeah, I think that's smart. And, we have, drummers from every genre on the show and talk about their new releases and all that good stuff. And I always say to folks, look, buy a physical copy. Buy it from CD Baby. If you have to download it, go to CD Baby, because they actually pay the artist a little bit more. If you go through Spotify or Apple or whatever, I famously point to Peter Frampton, who said, Baby, I Love Your Way got downloaded 15 million times and I got a check for $2,000. So I mean, it's pretty
unfortunate.
It's pretty stupid to think about, how much music gets consumed that way, and so little of that revenue makes it to the creator and the artist. And, we're all working hard to change that, but change takes time. And, I don't know what to tell you. I opened up a Billboard magazine back over the summer, and I can't remember. It was one of the hip hop artists, number one record in the country that week, debuted at number one and had sold 6,000 physical copies, but had been, streamed 80 million times. So
unbelievable.
It really is unbelievable.
Yeah, well, it's definitely a considerable contrast to what it was like growing up. And I think, unfortunately, that is played a role in the saturation of mediocrity that is available for people to hear.
Yep.
And I just think the general populace has been dumbed down on what is exceptional and what is passable, because anything can be thrown out there. There's no gatekeeper anymore.
I agree.
And it's unfortunate.
It really is. And, I say all the time, and I don't mean to get on my soapbox here, but I have said this on the show a million times over the last 2 years that I've been doing episodes of the Drum Shuffle. The good news is anybody can make a record right now. The bad news is anybody can make a record right now. The problem is there's so much good music out there, great music even, but you are so oversaturated with things, it's hard to find the great ones, Yeah,
you're right. I would agree 100%.
So you just, you got to go through 10,000 releases every week to find the 10 or 12 that are really stellar. And, trying to do my part on this show, if you're a drummer and you like good music, Shapes by David Northrup is an approved listen from the Drum Shuffle. So,
well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Pick up a copy of it. David, as is the tradition here on our show, and I want to be respectful of your time. I don't want to take up your whole day, but what we traditionally do with all of our guests is we ask them for good advice. And, you've played with so many just, legendary artists, and you've been doing it at such a high level for such a long time. What advice would you give to other drummers, other musicians that they should be doing in their day-to-day lives?
Oh, good question. Just as we spoke about the oversaturation of mediocrity as far as music is concerned, I think there's an oversaturation on YouTube and Instagram and any place that you can see videos of all these players with these stellar chops. And I think a lot of that is incredible. And I'm impressed and enamored by some of that. But I always have this thing in the back of my mind when I see some of this, and I always ask myself, or sometimes I want to respond and say, with what you just displayed, how does that make the music feel? in what context would you use all that stuff from a working standpoint? And it's not to diminish great technique and the fluidity and the masterfulness of someone having stellar chops. But the most important thing that we do as musicians is support each other as we do as drummers, is to support the song, regardless of what it is. So good time, good feel, having touch on your instrument, breathing life into music. Anybody can get up and hit things on our instrument. You can make noise on the drum set. There's a difference between that and making music on the drum set. So I always try to think in terms of what can I do to support the music? What can I do to make it feel good? That's everything. And I think there was a bit of good fortune growing up in a time listening to guys like Jim Keltner and Jeff Porcaro and Steve Gadd, Rick and Jerry Murata and Manu Katché and Vinny and Dave Weckl and a list goes on. Russ Kunkel, guys that played just with just a lush passion for making the music feel good. And those players stick out because they were the epitome of that. And it's transcended to guys like Greg Bissonet's another fantastic musical player, Matt Chamberlain, Abe Laboriel Jr. These are names of people that young players should be familiar with.
Yep.
And it goes back to like album credits. If you don't have an opportunity or if you don't have the resources, which we do, to look up and find out who played on what. And that's part of our tutelage as players. It was part of my tutelage growing up, was reading album credits, finding out who played that great groove that drew me in,
Yeah.
So, I guess I'm going a little bit off on tangent here, but, referring back to all these fantastic videos of these lightning fast chops, that's not all there is. That's maybe the icing on the cake. That's maybe a tenth of what is really required if you want a job. You have to play for the song. You have to really listen to the lyrics. You have to, like I said, breathe life into a track. Make it sound human.
Yeah.
And that just comes down with paying attention and listening to what everybody else is playing and supporting that.
That's super, super good advice. And speaking of good videos, I want to give a plug to your YouTube channel. Lots of great drum cam footage of you playing with all of these artists. And when I was just a wee little lad growing up, the first song that I can remember that was just like life-changing for me was Elvira by the Oak Ridge Boys.
Yeah, man.
I was probably 2 or 3 years old when that was, number one on the country charts for weeks and weeks on end. And, I checked out your video of you playing that song. Pretty simple song, not much to it, but you had some just so tasty, nothing over the top chop wise, but just little tasty embellishments in that song that were perfect. That's what you're talking about.
Well, thanks. And that was a great gig. Those guys were very, very, very cool about allowing and wanting us as musicians to do what we could to make things sound and feel maybe a little bit more current, but also honoring the roots of the song. And they love that sort of stuff, So that was a cool situation to be able to stretch a little bit,
Yeah, for sure. Well, and it's great. And there's tons of great content on your YouTube channel. So I'm going to encourage everybody to check that out. One last thing before we let you go. I know you do a lot of, kind of master classes and clinics with your association with Gretsch and all the different companies that you've been with for a number of years. Do you take on private students at all these days, or are you focusing mainly on the clinic side of education?
No, I'm definitely welcoming students. You know, as it stands right now, Skype lessons, Zoom lessons. I've actually even done lessons just with my phone. You know, just considering the state of where we are right now with the COVID-19 situation. But I am definitely set up for teaching, and would definitely welcome new students. I have a few right now, but I'm very much looking to expand that so people could reach out to me on social media, or you know, my email, which is dsnorthrup@aol.com. Yeah, I'm totally into that. The clinic thing has been wonderful, and I had about 7 clinics on the books that unfortunately got canceled, and I was really looking forward to those to help promote the CD. And all my companies have been really fantastic about that, but you know, tragically, they all have gone away with the state of things.
Yeah, well, I mean, here's hoping and praying that we're back to normal here before too long, and you can get out there and, you know, educate the masses as you've been doing for many, many years. David, I sincerely want to thank you for taking time to do this. I'm, you know, as I mentioned, we've got so many friends in common. It's amazing that we haven't met before now, but
I know.
I really look forward to getting in a room with you at some point and shaking your hand and all that. But thanks for taking the time to come on the Drum Shuffle. Everybody, it's davidnorthrup.com. He has dropped his email and all that. We'll link to all that stuff from our website. Reach out to David. He'd be a great resource for you. David, thanks so much. You're welcome here anytime.
Thanks very much, Jamie. I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. Folks, go pick up Shapes by David Northrup. David, we will talk to you very, very soon, sir.
Thank you.
All right. See you now. All right, guys and girls, that's going to wrap up episode 97 of the Drum Shuffle. Hey, as always, thank you so much for tuning in. We just absolutely cannot do this show without each and every one of you doing so week in and week out. We appreciate it from the bottom of our hearts. As always, hit the subscribe button on whatever platform you use to listen in. We have some fantastic interviews coming up over the next couple of weeks that you're not going to want to miss. Next week, I'm going to be joined by a great producer, drummer, and recording engineer. Mark Damian will be my guest next week. And then the week after that, I am going to be joined by the drummer of one of my favorite bands of all time, Junkyard. I will be joined by Patrick Muzingo of Junkyard, and that's one that I've been looking forward to for quite some time as well. So you're not going to want to miss that. As always, we answer every single email that we receive here. The Drum Shuffle Podcast at gmail.com is where you can reach out to us. We will respond to that. TheDrumShuffle.com is our web address. And of course, you can find more information on me over at jamieeads.com. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. We can't do it without you. You guys stay safe, stay healthy, keep on woodshedding. And until next time, may your heads stay strong and your sticks never break. Cheers, everybody.